Okay, let me go ahead and introduce our speaker without further ado. I'm going to introduce Dr. Angela Valenzuela. She is a professor in the Department of Curriculum Instruction and the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy at the University of Texas at Austin. She is the director of the Texas Center for Education Policy. Previously, she taught in the Department of Sociology at Rice University in Houston and was a visiting scholar at the Center for Mexican American Studies at the University of Houston. She has completed her PhD at Stanford University. She is the author of an award-winning book, Subtractive Schooling, U.S. Mexican Youth and the Politics of Caring. She serves on the LULAC National Task Force on Higher Education and is the executive director of the National Latino Education Research and Policy Project, a consortium of 10 institutions that enhances teaching for high school youth in Texas, California, Wisconsin, Chicago, New York, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. We are so glad to have you here today, and she will introduce our other panelists as they jump into the conversation. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your kind introduction. On behalf of the panel, to whom you shall get introduced shortly, I will introduce AISD high school teacher, Mr. Andrew Gonzalez, and he will introduce our two student panelists. We thank you for this wonderful opportunity to share with you the hope, promise, and reality of ethnic studies as it is experienced in the lives of faculty, public school teachers, and students. So I'd like to begin this event with a land acknowledgement. I think you saw it flash across your screen a little bit ago, but I'd like to go ahead and read it. We would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on indigenous land. Moreover, we would like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the Carrizo and Comecrudo, Huahuiltecan, Caddo, Tonkawa, Comanche, Lipanapache, Alabama Cosharo, Kickapoo, Tiwa Pueblo, and all the American Indian and indigenous peoples and communities who have become and who have been a part of these lands and territories in Texas, here on Turtle Island. If you look at the June 9th, 2020 Student Community Statement, the 8 demands for transformative change, maybe someone can put that in the chat box, the link. They're demands of the University of Texas at Austin that come out of, they're in the wake of the George Floyd killing and the ensuing Black Lives Matter movement, that all UT programming begin this way. And it's an expression of respect to not only the descendants of these peoples and communities, despite the hurtful falsehood that Native Americans have vanished, I'm sure you've heard that, but also to encourage a more complete and critical rendering of history and contemporary society. Ethnic studies is an umbrella term for robust, often cutting edge, I believe it to be interdisciplinary fields of study. And when we say ethnic studies, we mean African American studies, Boricua, Puerto Rican studies, Native American and Indigenous studies, Asian American and Mexican American studies. It's often called Chicana studies or Chicano studies. I myself am a sociologist, but my areas areas include ethnic studies. Race relations and education are what I focus on in my research. I'm a proud affiliate right now of the Mexican American Studies program, Native American and Indigenous Studies at UT. I think that ethnic studies should also include women and gender studies, and it often does, but ethnic studies itself is intersectional, meaning that we customarily do address intersections of race, class, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality in our research and in our pedagogy. At the university level, ethnic studies is typically located in the liberal arts and humanities or social sciences, but also STEM, such as in the growing field of ethnomathematics and ethno-environmental sciences, an exciting area of pedagogy with our colleagues out of UTSA, Dr. Belinda Flores and Lorena Claes at UT San Antonio, is Mayan mathematics that makes use of the Mayan abacus, the Nepahualtzitzin, you ever heard of that? That our pre-Columbian ancestors used to build pyramids and great cities, so they had technology, and we need to know these histories. At the K-12 level, ethnic studies, we typically know it as multicultural education. That's what we've called it, with approaches that fall into roughly one of the following three categories. One is the infusion approach. So you infuse ethnic studies into an existing course like social studies. It could also be like into an arts program. It could also be comparative thematic, so it's across ethnic and racial groups that are also maybe thematic, maybe aligning to national heritage months. I mean, that's how they're often developed. And then you have the single group studies approach that align to fields of study, the ones already mentioned. These are fields, very serious fields of study that date back to the late 60s, early 70s. The single group approach is that for which a coalition spearheaded by a chapter of the National Association for Chicana and Chicano Studies advocated before the Texas State Board of Education. And this ended a 4-year struggle that began in 2014. I belong to this group, the Nox Tejas Focal group, that resulted in the ethnic studies framework that we have today in Texas as a result of this effort. What the Texas State Board of Education approved was a standards-aligned, TEKS-aligned high school Mexican-American, African-American, Native American, Asian American, and Latino studies courses. This is historic, my friends. This is really historic, and it precisely reflects the title of this presentation, The Power of Ethnic Studies to Dismantle Systems of Oppression. And I say that very proudly as a member of this group. This has been a legacy agenda for civil rights advocates, at least since the 1960s and 70s, when ethnic studies centers and departments were first formed on our college campuses. The September 2018 decision by the State Board of Education therefore marks the first time in Texas history that ethnic studies courses of any kind were approved by this body, amazingly. And quite the battle it was. You may have caught wind of the racist history textbook that we had to defeat in the process that called Mexicans lazy and that said our community constitutes a threat to democracy. Not unlike the allegations that maybe you're hearing today from high places, the nation's highest office, that those of us in ethnic studies are unpatriotic. This is not true. This is not true. For the record, we in ethnic studies not only love this country, but we also ache and hunger for a world of fairness and basic human and cultural rights, including the right to be different in a democracy. And that it enriches our democracy. And it wasn't until November of 2018 that this same board made the change of ensuring through curricular standards that slavery would get taught as playing a central role in the Civil War. I mean, it's stunning. It's stunning to think that it was ever otherwise, yet decades of children have come through our public schools with an incomplete and ultimately disempowering and hurtful version of history. The teachers may have taught differently, but we don't know what actually goes on in classrooms necessarily. But this was the curriculum that was official. The overarching goals of ethnic studies, I'm going to name 3 or 4. I mean, these are general statements. One doesn't really, one doesn't want to be prescriptive. I just want to be descriptive and generalizing. So one is to decolonize knowledge, such as through policy struggles and the teaching of a curriculum with a pedagogy that empowers our youth and intellectually nourishes them, right? Don't we all want to be nourished? What we know about social studies is that it emerges as a way to colonize Native American children who were forcefully separated from their parents and subjected to forced assimilation after the Dawes Act, which was 1887. And then in 1902, the boarding schools were built. This cruel policy is reminiscent, I would think you would agree, of the family separation and detention policies that are happening right now along the US-Mexico border. And in the detention centers across the US, I mean, it would be remiss of me, my students even mentioned this last night in class. I mean, what we're witnessing right now is just this horror of unwanted hysterectomies by a Georgia doctor. If you haven't heard, I mean, look it up. Working with an ICE detention facility who they call the uterus collector. I mean, this just is horrible. It sounds like Joseph Mengele and Nazi human experimentation. And so we exist to challenge. I mean, not only like Yeah, I mean, to advocate for ethnic studies, but to challenge injustices like this. So the colonial framework, we should note, was also taught in the early 1900s at Tuskegee Normal Institute. And so it also represented the kind of curriculum for African American people. In neither case, in the case of African Americans or Native Americans, was it ever a tool for political and enfranchisement. And this continues, and never for Mexican Americans. I mean, we're living in a world, right, where that is characterized by dispossession. We've been robbed of our languages, our identities, and that feeling of injustice just doesn't go away. So no matter how pejoratively we may sometimes be portrayed, like as unpatriotic, what we seek aligns to the 1948 United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states in Article 15, Section 1, that everyone has the right to a nationality. In Section 2 of that same article, the Declaration says that no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of their nationality, nor denied the right to change their nationality. Article 13, Section 2 relates directly to immigrants with the assertion that everyone has the right to leave any country, including their own, and to return to their country. These rights surpass the Bill of Rights by legitimating substantive rights to which individuals and communities are entitled, simply because they are human beings. The United States is one of very few countries remaining that have not endorsed this Bill of Rights, United Nations Declaration. According to the 2000 United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it recognizes that Indigenous peoples have important collective human rights, including the right to self-determination, spirituality, territories, lands, and natural resources. Another goal, so I mentioned, that we need to decolonize knowledge. Well, we also want to liberate ways of knowing and being in the world. So an important takeaway from this panel is that our liberation is your liberation. Why? Because we want to be free from the ongoing political project of forced assimilation. We want a right to difference in the democracy. We want a world where we can enjoy and celebrate and have ceremony and honor the stories, the languages, the cultures and identities of our very, very diverse communities, and to learn about others, right? To be part of this tapestry where it's honored and not viewed as suspect. So the idea is not to at all to establish a new orthodoxy, but really to liberate learning. So I think how I can talk to you about this is through the work that we're doing, and I want to talk to you about this a little bit before getting to the rest of the panel, which involves our teacher Andrew Gonzalez and our two students. So what we have is a school, a Saturday school, Academia Cuautli, and it's really a beautiful, beautiful school. We inaugurated in 2014. It involves the collective work of people that wanted to create just such an elementary school. What we know is that, and I don't think it's unique to the Austin Independent School District, but something happens developmentally as children go from the 3rd to the 4th grade, and they get embarrassed about being Mexican or Latina, Latino, and they don't want to speak Spanish, and it's very troubling to their parents, many of them who are Spanish dominant, that they're ashamed and embarrassed of who they are. And so what we wanted to establish was a cultural revitalization project. And so we offer instruction. It's a co-constructed curriculum. It's this ecology that involves us, nuestro grupo. That's the name of our group. It means our group, and we meet regularly. Actually tonight is our meeting night, but we're all meeting here instead. But we've been in existence. We're going into our 7th year. It's a partnership. Thank you, AISD. Thank you, David Kaufman. Alejandro Gongora, thank you, Jessica Jolliffe, and just everybody for the partnership. Just so thankful for the Mexican American Culture Center, where we're physically located, the MAC board, Lori Navarrete, Michelle Rojas, those that we're like family. It's this ecology. We have a partnership, like I said, with the district, the school, then also with the Austin Area Association for Bilingual Education, which creates the pool of teachers that end up teaching our co-constructed curriculum. They're bilingually certified teachers. Dr. Chris Milk works wonders, and Maestra Liliana Batista works wonders with them. We also have a Calpuli, that's a Mexica, an Aztec community that is part of our escuelita, our school, and we offer an indigenous curriculum that includes danza. And danza Mexica, Aztec dance, is really not dance, it's ceremony, and it's so beautiful. I mean, what could be more sacred? What could be more sacred than the education of our children? And yet we don't really experience schooling typically in the public school system anywhere. I mean, anywhere. In this way. I'm speaking very generally, and I know that there are really beautiful places and spaces where awesome work is being done. But I mean, the point of Academia Cuautli is to enhance and enrich and to nourish children's identities. Oftentimes they feel like they're strangers, like they don't belong here. And what we show them is that, hey, your ancestors date back to the original descendants of this continent, and that's so important for them to grasp, and it gives them a sense of belonging in a moment and a context that is very oftentimes hostile. I mean, these are the children from East Austin, Sanchez, Metz, Zavala, Houston, and Perez Elementary, and they're like trying to figure out on their own things that we should be mediating through a good curriculum, through a good example, that buen ejemplo, right? Through the kind of education that, if we come together as community in partnership, can be beneficial to all. A lot of this work involves parents. We have great, amazing leaders, Itzel does wonders, Alejandro Kiawi Martinez, and I want to mention a few people, miss some because we've been in existence for a long time, but gracias, Maria, Unda, you're amazing. And also we have Lauren Shook and Emilio Zamora, our elders. We have our elders, so we're intergenerational, and that's a really beautiful part. So what we offer is a place-based curriculum, right? And so it's very situated, and that is the power of ethnic studies, where you really just liberate kind of like these structures of oppression that a lot of them, they exist in the mind. You're being, told either directly or indirectly that you don't belong. So I mean, if you really think about it, if your language is in jail, your culture is in jail, your identity is in jail, if you don't see yourself represented in the curriculum, in the textbook, in the states, if you don't see yourself represented, I mean, this is a serious problem, then, you might as well, you are in jail. Your consciousness, your persona, yourself, your community, your history is in jail. So we want to liberate these ways of knowing and this precious knowledge that is so redemptive and so hopeful. I do want to show you a 2-minute, I promise, just so you can get a sense of the vibe, a 2-minute video. This should work. Let me see. Of Academia Cuautli. Okay, still share screen. Should work. Yeah, I think this is it. Still learning Zoom, everybody, so here goes.
This news segment from KLRU brought to you by Texas Mutual Insurance.
For the most part, children in our public schools, and this isn't unique to Austin, they are not getting a curriculum that responds to their culture, their identities, their communities in ways that affirm who they are. Children that come to Academia Cuautli have an opportunity to learn these things and learn that they're not marginal, that they're actually members of communities that have roots that go all the way back to the original inhabitants of this continent. The idea was to really build on the district's current efforts. The Austin Independent School District has 60 plus schools that teach dual language, but there's really not enough curriculum right now. Because there aren't those basic kinds of materials, the community felt an urgency about bringing in resources that could be of use to our teachers. We're teaching exclusively in Spanish. The children right now are learning about migration, immigration, civil rights, and local history. A lot of children feel very alienated from school, particularly if they're immigrants. It helps them to feel connected to the larger curriculum. It becomes a bridge. Children at this level are studying the Greek gods and getting access to Texas history. And this is an opportunity to share from a grounded, rooted, historic standpoint what that culture, language, what the cultural arts are and have been for this community.
This local news segment was brought to you by Texas Mutual Insurance.
Okay. Okay, I think I have to. Okay. Okay, let me turn this off here. Okay, I'm singing for you. Here goes. I don't know how that's happening, but let me fix this. All right. This is funny. I think I'm back. We also sing songs, and there's a lot of recovery when you're talking about songs and music. It's just so beautiful to, to think about how through it, our community, there is a newness. Everything feels new, and that's why we're a revitalization project. Don't we all want that? Don't we all want that? And so that's what we enjoy. It's a precious gem. And I haven't thanked everybody. I apologize. There's so many. We've also become a pathway into the University of Texas. So what's really, really cool is that a lot of people that learn about us, they realize, oh, well, I want to, get into higher education. And so I think we've created, as a result of our work, we've established a pathway of young people that want to become master's students and PhDs, doctoral students at the University of Texas and the College of Education. And so that's a beautiful kind of like outcome of the work. And it's what happens. It's the magic. It's, it's the magic that happens when you do this, amazing work in the community. So what I want to do now is just to pivot. We do have a panel here, and I wanted to introduce you to Mr. Andrew Gonzalez. He currently teaches STEAM leadership, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, and also PALS, AVID, and the history of pop music at Lively Middle School in Austin, Texas. I think an important takeaway from this panel, I hope, is that our liberation is your liberation. We really want to be free to teach our stories. And so, Andrew, I'm just so happy to be associated with you, because I know you're an amazing teacher and an inspiration to our students. And I really can't say enough about you. I think you were a celebrity recently, right, on Wyatt Cenac's Problem Areas, the HBO series, and that's really awesome. In 2019-20, you were named Campus Teacher of the Year at Travis High School. You're amazing. And you're also an Ally of the Year by the Young Women's Christian Association of Greater Austin. You're an Austin native. You also attended UT, where you completed 4 undergraduate degrees. That's incredible, in government, history, international relations, and global studies, as well as Latin American studies. And you're currently working on a master's degree in curriculum and instruction. You're a campus steward and an active member of both the NEA and the Texas AFT. So without further ado, thank you, Andrew. And I know you were going to introduce our student speakers, our panelists as well. Done.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Valenzuela, for that very generous introduction. I just wanted to say before I introduce Aldo and Marian, my two superstar students who are gracious enough to be here tonight. I just wanted to center kind of how important the work that Dr. Valenzuela and Academia Cuautli are doing. Like Dr. Valenzuela said, I'm an Austin native. My parents are also both from Austin. They grew up here. They went to Austin ISD. When both of them were in elementary school, they spoke Spanish as their first language, and they both received physical punishment from teachers in this district. And so to see now the work that Academia Cuautli is doing is just a complete 180. And so I think that it's changing lives, you know, like Dr. Valenzuela said. And so yeah, that's just a little tidbit about me and why I'm doing the work that I'm doing. But I did also want to introduce my two students, like I said, Aldo and Marion. And so I'll start with Marion. Marion Nunez is a senior at Travis High School, where I used to teach. In addition to being an all-star athlete, she's on the varsity soccer team as well as the tennis team. She's a student in our I don't work there anymore, in the early college high school program, where when she graduates from Travis, she will graduate with an Associates of Arts degree, meaning that she will have, you know, an associate's degree and her high school diploma at the same time, which is quite impressive. I did not do that. In addition to that, she's also a member of the top 10% of her class, so she's quite a qualified young woman. Aldo Frausto, on the other hand, is vice president of the National Honor Society. He's currently a junior at Travis High School, and he is also, in addition to both of those things, a member of the early college high school program like Marion is, and when he graduates next year, he will also graduate with an Associate of Arts degree. He's also the top 10% of his class, and I have to mention that Aldo took his AP exam last year in world history in the middle of a pandemic, and he scored a 5 on it, which is the highest score that you can get on an AP world history exam, or any AP exam. So shout out to Aldo for pulling that off. Yes, you have a lot to be proud of. So anyway, and I was his AP World History teacher, but that's not a big deal. That's an aside. So anyway, I have a list of 4 questions that I want to ask both Aldo and Marion, and I'll kind of just go back and forth between the two of you. And then Dr. Valenzuela, if you want to add anything, feel free to just jump right on in. But with this first question, I'm going to start with you, Aldo, and then I'll go to Marion. And what I've got is, this year has been pretty bananas from top to bottom, right? We're in a pandemic. We had a Supreme Court justice that passed away, rest in peace, last weekend, right? We have seen a flourishing of a protest movement over the summer centered around police violence, police brutality, and Black Lives Matter, and et cetera, right? So, Aldo, how do you connect all that stuff, and Marion, you too, to the things that we talked about, the things that you learned as a student in our ethnic studies class? And I'll start with all of you first.
Okay, ethnic studies has helped me better understand what's going on in 2020 with all the movements, the Black Lives Matter movements, the Me Too movements, the movements to fight climate change, all the social movements. It's too many to remember. But ethnic studies has helped me because ethnic studies is a course where it helps me out to always seek for the truth, to do my research before terminating a side, examine all the different sides between me. For example, in ethnic studies, we had to do a project called the Action to Research Project, which in this case, I decided to do the Austin homeless population. And I decided to reach out to Stephen Kronk. I believe that's his name, the city manager.
Spencer
Kronk. I decided to reach out to him. And once I reached out to him, I gave him enough time, plenty of time. I emailed him several times, and one of those emails, he responded to me. I don't have the exact email because I delete my emails. It bothers me to have so many, but he responded me to say that he was basically too busy because it was during the beginning of the COVID pandemic. If we look at the chart of the COVID stats, we see that Stephen Kronk has not done a really good job here in Austin because looking at the maps, we see that the grand majority of the COVID tests are going to be on the east side of I-35, which includes the schools Travis, east side, some part of Aikens.
Oh, thank you, Aldo. Yes. Yeah, just to add to that, that was like pretty jarring for me. I remember it was like right before the school got canceled on March 13th, which was eons ago. But I remember Aldo coming in and showing me that email from the city manager and being pretty floored that was the response to a high school student. And especially, you know, when you could have forwarded the question to somebody else. But what he was referring to was an action research project where they look at problems in their community and then find stakeholders, decision makers that would have the ability to you know, affect that problem and then try to put it into action. And that's the culminating project for the end of the year. But thank you, Aldo. Marion, same question to you. A lot of stuff in 2020. How do you make sense of it? How do you connect it to things that we talked about in class?
Well, one of the things we talked about in class was how African Americans used to be persecuted, you know, slavery, Jim Crow, all of that. And it helped me connect the things that happened to George Floyd with Emmett Till, right? They were both, you know, George Floyd was not resisting arrest. Emmett Till was literally just minding his business when some white lady decided to lie and say that he harassed her. It also helped me connect a teenager at Travis, Devontae Ortiz, was shot and killed about 2 years ago, right after he graduated from Travis. And his killer wasn't persecuted. He wasn't sentenced. Same like how the cops have not been sentenced in Breonna Taylor's case. Yeah.
Thank you, Marion. Yeah, I know that's a big question, and there's a lot that you could pull from. But just to add some context to that, because she did mention another student that had gone to Travis in 2018 in the summertime. It was actually on the 4th of July that evening. Devontae, who, like I said, was a former Travis student, was popping fireworks in his parking lot of his apartment complex, which is pretty standard American thing to do on the 4th of July. And a white man, came out of his apartment and confronted him about popping fireworks on that day. And he shot and killed him right there in the parking lot of his apartment complex. And this is July, graduation is in early June. So we're talking weeks after he had just gotten his high school diploma. And so that's, yeah, it's impossible to escape the reality that, you know, police violence presents to specifically communities of color, like our high school is. Travis is a Title I high school. We're vastly Latinx populated. It's like 85% or something, 10% African American, and a small population of white students. So thank you, Marion, for that. The second question I have is how, although I'll go back to you, because I don't want to call on anybody twice in a row. How did ethnic studies make you think differently or change you, or did it make you think differently or change you? Maybe it didn't.
Well, your question is, how did ethnic studies help me to think differently rather than the standard student, the one that didn't take ethnic studies, which I would be really close-minded, I believe. I wouldn't be as open-minded if I hadn't taken ethnic studies, since I previously mentioned ethnic studies taught me to always seek for the truth, do my own research before deciding us to pick a side. Not only did ethnic studies help me seek for the truth, but it also helped me expand my knowledge in history by learning different perspectives of different ideas, such as the American colonization. How was that different than what I'm taught in a regular textbook, in a regular U.S. history textbook? It it also helped me. Oh,
Take your time, man. You're doing great. Keep going.
It, it,
En español,
That's okay.
en español, ¿lo quieres decir en español?
It's okay, Aldo. If you want to pause and chew on that, I can go to Marian and then I can come back to you, and that's totally fine. So Marian, I'll take the question to you. How did ethnic studies change you or make you think differently? Did it impact you? Did it make you think differently? Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, I learned about seeing problems from different perspectives. You know, I learned about what other groups of people have experienced, how different groups of people have experienced similar types of oppression, you know, like school oppression and school segregation, you know, how whites and blacks and like Latinos and stuff, whites and then Latinos and blacks had to be segregated and we had like the worst education. I also learned how to use my voice by participating in 3 protests my freshman year, because that's when I took ethnic studies. I participated in 2 protests relating to immigration in DACA, and then 1 protest with the organization March for Our Lives Against Gun Violence. 1 second. Okay, that was my sister. Yeah, so about the DACA protest, we marched down to Senator John Cornyn's office to meet with him, right? We sent 2 student representatives up there to his office. We were all down in a group. We sent 2 student representatives up to his office, and we knocked on the door. They answered, and then they said, "We do not want to talk to you," and then they shut the door on us and didn't refuse to talk to us. And you know, now that I'm seeing in his like re-election ads, he's saying that he supports the DACA program, which is just not right. He does not support the DACA program. That's just like, that's not okay. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you, Marian. You said a lot. Okay. I guess I'll take it back to like how that so Marian referenced that there were 3 different protests that took place on our campus. That was not part of the ethnic studies class. It was organized and led by ethnic studies students, and I helped them kind of in an advisory capacity just to make sure that everything was safe and that everything they were doing was informed. But the reason that had happened was her freshman year was when President Trump was elected into office, and it was like in September. It was like very early on in the year that the Attorney General Jeff Sessions had announced that they were not going to be renewing applications for deferred action. And we had a student in our ethnic studies class. There are many students at Travis, and we had at the time 2 teachers at our high school that were recipients of DACA. And that announcement really just put this massive cloud over what her plans were going to be after her senior year, because she didn't know if she was going to, how the college application process, her financial aid was going to be affected by this announcement. And it was really kind of beautiful to see the class recognize what she was going through and then rally around her. And they came in with different ideas about, I remember one thing that was floated was forming a human chain around the school to prevent what at that time was like a specter of deportations, you know, that it, to some degree did become true. But what they decided to do ultimately was to carry out that walkout to Senator Cornyn's office. And they delivered, it's a mile, it's like 3 miles, you know, it's to get there. So it's 7 round trip to go from our high school to his office. So you have to like really be committed to doing that. And so, yeah, I commend the students for doing that, and it was just so humanizing to see that. And what Marian said is true. I've heard the same thing, that DACA and Senator Cornyn's support, not to get too political here, but he's touting that as part of his re-election campaign. So interesting, because I was there and I saw that happen. So yeah, but thank you, Marian. Although, did you want to add anything, or I'm sorry, Dr. Valenzuela, did you want to say something?
We just said I was there as well, and what I wanted to say is that And I mean, what you get is empowerment with ethnic studies. When you know your history, when you know your culture, when you know the system, and you're able to like really just provide an analysis then that helps you like be more thoughtful in terms of how to take it on, right? And what we do at Academia Cuautli is we also have like these convivios and these gatherings, and it's family and community, and we've had them mock demonstrations around the Mexican American Culture Center with banners, and it's like for immigrant rights, right? It's for bilingual education, it's for the things that are near and dear to us. And so this is a part of the ethnic studies curriculum. So yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Valenzuela, for adding that. I will add that members of Academia Cuautli were there. Thank you for reminding me. Back in 2017, Dr. Valenzuela mentioned that there are elders in Academia Cuautli, and they were out there in the streets with the kids too. So it truly is an intergenerational project here. Okay, I will go on to the third question. I'll go back to Aldo, give Marian a break. The third one I got is, Aldo, so we talked about how it might have affected your thinking going through the course, how you've connected what you've learned to all the things that have happened this year. Taking all that into consideration, what do you see is the value of ethnic studies, or how would you describe the value of ethnic studies?
Under my perspective, I don't think ethnic studies has a true value, because if we're talking about value, we're talking about a number wise. I don't think ethnic studies could be said, oh, it's a value of a 10 out of 10. No, I don't think it has a value. Ethnic studies teaches you a lot about different sides of you, how to embrace your community. I'm a dual language, so I have learned throughout my 11 years of the education system to embrace that I'm a Chicano, that speaking another language is a gift and not a course, that I shouldn't be scared of speaking Spanish out in public, that I should not only embrace it, but also emphasize it. But ethnic studies, to me, it doesn't really have a value. It's so much. For ethnic studies, it's a wide open class that doesn't only focus on star, star, star. Like, for example, putting third graders to do a star and claiming that the star is the best solution. I believe star only tests the zip code rather than your actual knowledge.
And that is demonstrated by the evidence, right? I mean, and if you go to the students' demands, I'm going to refer to that again for the University of Texas. One of the things that our students are asking for is test optional admissions. And so, I think the same concerns that you're expressing, Aldo, are concerns that are shared broadly by students everywhere. And if anything, they've been used as gatekeepers to keep youth of color from specific zip codes out of higher education. So not to veer too far off, but your point is well taken.
Thank you, Aldo. Thank you, Dr. Valenzuela. I'll take it to Marian. Marian, what do you see as the value of ethnic studies?
The value of ethnic studies, it's a very important class to me. I think it should be taught in all grades. It helps people in events, like in regular classes, like in regular history classes. All we learn about is how America succeeded, how Europeans were the best race to ever exist, right? In ethnic studies, it teaches you about the contributions Mexican Americans made, Native Americans made, and African Americans. Yeah, African Americans. I think ethnic studies removes the excuse of not knowing what other groups of people have experienced and the types of oppression they have faced. It helps remove the excuse of not knowing or being ignorant, right? It teaches to listen to other people when they tell you what they're going through. It's not just dead white men change things. Um, yeah, yeah, I think that's it.
That was great. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Okay, okay. So Marion actually kind of answered the last question that I have here, just to kind of wrap it out, and I guess to however much time we have left. But the last question I've got is to Aldo, and that is, Aldo, do you think that ethnic studies should be required for students in K through 12? And if you are thinking of it, do you think that it's something that they should take in high school, like you and like Marion have taken, or do you see it anywhere else in your K through 12 education?
I believe ethnic studies should be taught from since pre-K all the way to 12th grade. Because why do it would be like saying you only have to take 1 year of English for you to learn maybe the alphabet, sound simple words and sound. Like that's why they force us to take English for 12 to 13 years of our lives, depending if you went to pre-K or kinder. They force us to learn English. So why only say, oh, you only have to take one ethnic studies? You cannot cover the 1 year of curriculum. Sorry, let me rephrase that. You cannot cover 12 years of curriculum in just 1 year. I know many of you guys are wondering, but why should we teach about homicide to kindergartens? No, we shouldn't. We should instead teach them to embrace their culture. If you, I believe, and I have heard several kids, and the truth behind the escuelita from Professor Valenzuela is because kids are ashamed to express their ethnicity, their values of being Hispanic, Hondurans, being Honduran.
Thank you, Aldo. You're crushing it. Just keep going. You got it.
So for me personally, ethnic studies should be taught from K to 12th grade, as I previously stated. It makes more sense to me. I know many of you guys are going to disagree, but looking at 12 years of curriculum, you want for teachers to teach it in 1 year to only cover basics instead of covering the roots. You want to dismantle racism, but you only want to teach the basics. And that doesn't make sense in my head. Maybe in yours it does, but in my head it doesn't make sense. I think change happens over time. It's not a matter of overnight. So that's what I think, that is the reason why I think ethnic studies should be taught all the way from pre-K till 12th grade and even expand.
Oh, we are fired up tonight, Aldo. Okay. Well, I'll add a little bit to that, just from my experience as an ethics-based teacher. I'll say that, when every year that I've taught the course, or that I had taught the course, I had that question like all the time. The kids would take the course and they would want to follow up. They would want to take something else to build on that. And unfortunately, not, that there's not that. There isn't, at this point, and there absolutely should be, because yeah, to take it to Aldo's point, I mean, about the learning basics, right? Like the alphabet and sounds and simple words in your first year. Like, there are ethnic studies is like its own discipline with it at the college level, and their entire courses taught on just, well, I have like 2 days to cover, and not like full days, like an hour and a half on each of those days to talk about all of Jim Crow, So I do think that what he's saying is absolutely true, that like it's to only have it 1 year is wonderful, but it also does a disservice to the breadth of knowledge and experience that's available when you truly engage with ethnic studies curriculum. And so, Marian, I'll take it back to you on that if you wanted to add anything, but I know that you had already said that you agreed, but yeah, do you want to add anything else to that question?
No, it's just that I agree that it should be taught K through 12. You can't teach all of our history in one semester, in 1 year. That's just not fair to us to not be able to learn our history how it should be taught.
I'd like
Thank you,
to.
Marian. Oh yeah, Dr. Valenzuela.
I'd like to comment that I mean, I think that we should definitely have a lot more ethnic studies in the curriculum. Someday, I trust that it'll just be called a good education, right? I mean, it won't be marginal like it is today. And this is a national movement. It's in Texas, but it's also a national movement. And so it's not just us here in Austin, Texas, but it's people throughout Texas, as I mentioned earlier, and it's throughout the country. California, the CSU system right now is wanting to make ethnic studies a requirement, and they're involved right now in that struggle, right? And so I mean, I think what you're hearing is just, you know, this real heartfelt, you know, this cry for inclusion, for representation, for truth, you know, the truth of history. I mean, it's not going to be all pretty, right? And it's not. No history is all pretty, but at least, you know, you're not lied to. And I think that that's what they realize, right? When they get into the ethnic studies classroom, it's like, whoa, my college students tell me the same thing. My college students, they come into my class and they go, wow, I never learned this. And no one ever taught this to me, right? Or I didn't get this perspective. I mean, this is like really a good perspective, you know, and if I hadn't taken this class, it might have just gone right past me. And you know, when you think about, for example, the cops, you know, the killers, I mean, I bet you most of them had a public education, right? Most of them, the killers, the cop killers, the, you know, the racists, the ethno-nationalists, I mean, they're products of our public school system. And so, I mean, it's really clear that we need a moratorium on some things, and other things need to really be ascendant, like the critical thinking, the ethnic studies, right? And we need teachers. My last point here is that we have the policy that is way ahead of the faculty, the teachers. And so we need to create, you know, like some way so that we can have more people like you in the classroom, Andrew. I mean, we need to, you know, partner and create pathways and, you know, think about maybe what UTSA is doing. They have, you know, this accreditation that they're developing right now, state approved. So there's that kind of policy work that needs to be done. Welcome to the movement. Welcome to the movement, everybody.
Well, that's all the questions I have, and I want to thank Aldo and Marion again for that. Was awesome. Y'all just knocked it out of the park. You both crushed it. And also thank you to the LBJ School for having us. I don't usually get to speak at fancy schmancy things like this, so it's a big deal for me.
We're glad to have you. We have a bunch of questions that have come in the Q&A box, and we have about 30 minutes left. If y'all, if I can go ahead and just ask some questions, and most of them are not pointed at a specific person to answer them, and so whoever feels the most comfortable answering the question, or as I go through them, if it feels like I'm going to direct it to someone, I will. Also, reminder to participants, attendees, if you have a question, open the Q&A box and type it in there, and you can also upvote other people's questions. So there's a thumbs up you can click on, and I can see that people want that question asked, and so it'll move up to the top, and I'll be able to ask that right away. But I do, before I ask any questions, I'll give folks time to type them in there. But I don't know, Aldo and Marion, if you were looking at the chat box while you were speaking, but you have some huge fans now. A lot of cheerleaders in the crowd here for you today. They are supporting you all the way. And so if you haven't scrolled through, you should definitely take some time. I'll also share that transcript with you guys. So, okay, we have some questions in here. So I'm going to throw out this first one. What policies need to be passed, supported, and funded by Austin ISD Board of Trustees, the Texas State Board of Education, and the state legislature in order to help grow ethnic studies programs and access to them?
Maybe. I have some thoughts about that. Well, I mean, I think making ethnic studies a requirement at the high school level. I mean, they're saying, you know, K through 12. I'm game, right? But you know, I think then that calls into question really the whole curriculum and the offerings that young people are getting. It also, I mean, I think that needs to be investigated. I mean, the curriculum that we have, you don't often challenge it. I mean, it didn't come from Jesus, right? It came from people that sat around a table and devised these standards and these, you know, these areas of you know, of learning and teaching. We also need to, like I mentioned earlier, we need to create pathways so the district could partner with us, so that we can create pathways into the teaching profession. I think a nice approach would be to, like, if you come in through Mexican American studies or African American studies, Asian American, Native American, that could be like the beginning of a pathway. So you come over to the College of Education, maybe take 12 hours with us, right? And then you become maybe certified. If we develop a certification, a credential that's internal, there is nothing at the state level. I think we also, definitely need resources for curriculum development. It's just, that's a big job, and it's best done by teachers. They're in the classroom, they know what students' needs are, their developmental levels, what works for them. And so what we're finding is there's not a lot of support. And so a lot of what we do is just, it's what we're able to produce in the summer, or, whenever we have time, which is not frequently that we have a lot of time. We squeeze it in, right? And so, there definitely need to be more resources for that. I think I'm at liberty to say that the Nox Tejas Foco is going to be advocating for ethnic studies as a requirement for high school graduation. If you look at the 8 demands, I keep talking about the 8 demands of the students, they're also talking about strengthening ethnic studies courses. You're not going to have these courses taught if we don't have strong programs at the college level. And they're wanting also to infuse racial justice in the structure that we have, the diversity requirements. We should all be doing ethnic studies, but you actually do need to be prepared. You actually have to have a focus. When we talk about calling for a statewide requirement, and it would be any of these studies. It would just take any of these, right? And that would satisfy the requirement. Maybe it could change places with American history. It could change places with world geography. At the college level, it's already the case that you can take Mexican American history instead of U.S. history. After all, it is American history, and it's an entry point. It's a gateway into history in a way that's like really meaningful to you and educative in so many ways, even beyond the specific content pertinent to Mexican American or Native American and Indigenous history and so on. That's what occurs to me. A lot of this work has to be based on partnerships, though. We have to be intentional and work together as institutions. I think the sky is the limit on this, and so we're game at Academia Cuautli. And at UT University of Texas. I want to thank my dean, Charles Martinez, who's been very supportive of all of these initiatives. My chair, Dr. Victor Sines. Thank you, Cynthia Salinas, Dr. Salinas. We've got good people. We just need to, make it happen.
Absolutely. I think you're right. It takes a lot of people, and we're hoping that, also by having you on here, we're helping expose more folks to the work that you've been doing and building more advocates for ethnic studies and other education that is more inclusive, for sure. We have a question here about standardized testing. So we know that standardized testing, an example of an institution controlling access to power, can determine a child's life outcomes by tracking them into a lower level of education. What can we do as public school teachers to push back on this?
I'd like to answer, and I would like Andrew to answer as well, because you're a teacher, public school teacher. But let me just say that I think there's 2 levels of concern here. One is the testing itself, right, which is very narrow and reductive, and the way that Aldo spoke. This is, not a curriculum, but it becomes a de facto curriculum when you teach to the test, right? And it's easily forgotten when it's so meaningless, right? It's just to satisfy a requirement. But the other level is that we do have a basic curriculum in the state of Texas. We should abolish that. I don't see leadership on that. We're so accustomed and used to tracking and sort of envisioning society as divisible into this hierarchy of socially constructed intelligence, right? When intelligence is it's so vast of a concept that we can't put a number to it. Right, Aldo? And not only can we not put a number to it, but it's used to objectify people, to treat them like objects. The children is part of, like just sort of a more general problem of not teaching children, but teaching subjects. And I would say that's more true in the later grades than in the elementary. I think in the elementary, there's still a lot of that sensitivity. So some of us are involved in a statewide coalition to take away the star and just default to the federal testing requirements. I'll do a shout out to TAMSA, Laura Yeager, Teresa Trevino, the TLEAC, the Texas Legislative Equity Coalition, a massive coalition that just thinks that this is so wrongheaded. And what our state and what the Department of Education wants to do is test all of our children in a pandemic. I mean, this is just terrible. It's just awful and so offensive and hurtful. And it already was offensive, terrible, and hurtful. It already was, because those of us know that, like Marian says, it's your zip code. That's all that's really measured. That's actually very, very true. That is correct. It's your zip code that is measured your income. Tests are supposed to discriminate, but not systematically by race and class. Okay, they are supposed to discriminate, and as long as they keep doing, resulting in those outcomes, then they become de facto powerful gatekeepers to mobility. And so, yeah, we need to reduce the amount of testing, and we can do that this next session. I'm very confident that we can do that. Andrew, what are your thoughts?
Sure, thank you. So I wanted to talk about just a couple of things in one of the activities that we do in ethnic studies class related to intelligence testing related to the history of xenophobia, the Immigration Naturalization Act of 1924, et cetera, is I have the students sit down and take an intelligence test that was used in that time period, and then we grade it together, and they see in the act of doing that how temporal it is, how culturally specific it is, and how it is not in any way, shape, or form measuring their intelligence, but measuring how familiar they are with their ability to draw a phonograph. Or that's the kind of intelligence test it is. It shows them a series of pictures, and they have to complete the missing objects that are in the pictures. Well, you don't know those things if you're not in a setting, if you don't grow up in a setting where that's used. And so if we extend that to like our standardized testing, our AP testing, our SAT, et cetera, if I grow up with parents who are academics and that are attorneys, and every night that I'm at the dinner table, I hear a certain vocabulary, I grow up in a certain cultural setting, then that's the language that the test is communicated in. And so like a fish in water, I'm going to be able to do that test immediately. But from my personal experience, what I've seen at my school, which is a highly, we have a significant, or had, I don't teach there anymore, I keep saying that. We had a significant immigrant population, a lot of students who are what they call late arrivals. So they've only recently in their high school years arrived in the United States. And immediately when they get here, what's put on their lap is these 5 all English 70+ question multiple choice exams that is the gatekeeper for them to be able to get a high school diploma. And they, despite whatever schooling that they might have received in their home language and their home country, none of that is seen as valuable within the system of testing, standardized testing that we have today. And like Dr. Valenzuela said, it works to create an underclass that is it's populated by a specific group of people, a specific nationality in the city of Austin. We're one of the deadliest cities in the country for construction workers, and a lot of those construction workers are undocumented, and they're students sometimes that have left high school because they're frustrated, and then they know that they can be successful, but the system isn't allowing them to be. So that's what I would say about that. And yeah, that's it. I'll stop. It's just a lot of things.
There's so much passion in your words, both of you, Dr. Valenzuela and Mr. Gonzalez, and it translates to your teaching. I can tell from your students there. There are a couple questions in here for Aldo and Marion, so I'm gonna jump around a little bit and ask y'all. This one asks, what do you think education should be for? What should education help you to do? So let's start with you, Aldo, and then we can go to Marion. What is the purpose of education to you, or what do you think it should be?
The purpose of education should be for us to get to know ourselves. Because when people ask you, who are you? Many of us could not answer that question. For example, if I were to do a survey of 1,000 people, I can I almost 100% positive that I'm not even 900 people could actually say who are they. They would be, I don't know, they would not know their identity. So I think education should be most based on getting to know your identity instead of I understand that we forcefully have to learn some basics, which that's all right, because then that puts us to success, but it should be more meant to each student. For example, elementary, we're going to put you to all these different techniques or stuff for you to start getting como, what are you trying to go, what do you want your life to be, your route life. In middle school, we should start focusing. For example, you want to be an engineer, we start getting you into those engineer classes, getting the basics. Do you really like it or not? Because when you go to college, I know a lot of college students don't know what they want to major in. They're like, I don't know, they have never been exposed to that.
Thank you, Aldo. Yeah. Marian, do you have any thoughts on what you think school, like the purpose of school really should be? Not necessarily what your experience is, but why should we go to school? What should we be learning?
I think we should be learning about like understanding the world and how, like, agreeing with what Aldo said, like understanding yourself and your place in the world, and what changes, learning about the changes you want to make, and yeah, like what type of like we want to learn about what changes we can make so that we can live in the type of world we want to live in.
Absolutely, Marian. I think that the two of you are going to change the world along with all of your peers. So y'all are so inspiring. Those were phenomenal answers. So well said. I'm going to hop back over to some questions maybe about ethnic studies program in particular. We have a few different questions around incorporating different disciplines. I'm going to go with this first one. It says, how do we start changing all curriculum to include the goals of ethnic studies and incorporate it to fit into disciplines and areas of learning for kids from kindergarten to 12th grade? Is that what you mean by the infusion approach? Is anyone already doing this?
I think that typically the weakest approach is going to be the infusion approach, because you already have a class and it's called social studies typically, right? Or it has another name, but you would just basically like layer over ethnic studies. I think that can be done well by a very conscientious teacher who has approval, and is not going to be subject to the gaze of administration and faculty for, I don't know, not meeting TEKS standards perhaps, or not really teaching the real social studies. And so, I think that what we need to have is either like comparative thematic. That is what the district has. So the district, and I should say that because of our advocacy, I mentioned nuestro grupo, our group, we organize the activities of Academia Cuautli. Academia Cuautli is not Nahuatl, it means Eagle Academy, okay? So, that's what it means. And but because of our advocacy back in 2018, we were able to, this was before it passed at the state board level, we were able to successfully advocate before the board for ethnic studies. And at that point, it was comparative thematic because we didn't have any teachers. So Oregon is, I think, a good example of like not having like too much ethnic studies, but they want to infuse all of the curriculum in Oregon, in the state of Oregon. So that would be like, something that you would have to do if you don't really have strong, robust ethnic studies programs, perhaps, and potential faculty that could teach your state. Ideally, there's a connection between what happens at the university and what happens at the K-12 level. And so you want to have strong ethnic studies at the higher education level. The students are calling for that too. They're demanding it, right? And I'm going back to the 8 demands. There's a reason for this. They exist because of ethnic studies, all right? But many of us have dedicated our lives, many years, decades, many of us, to exactly what we see happening, just this flowering of identity, right? This flowering of a deep sense of ownership and commitment to, to the democratic project of this country that is always unfolding. We should not, we should really resist privatizing education, because then you don't have a school board that you can go to, that you can advocate for what you want, right? But if you are in a public school, you do have a board. And so what you need to do is go to your local school board member and say, hey, guess what? The State Board of Education, back in 2018, they passed this law that makes ethnic studies an elective. I mean, you can do that right now. An elective. We would like African American studies to be taught in our classrooms, or in this school, or in these schools. It's going to take our communities stepping up to the plate and expressing what they want. If you're in a charter school and a private school, I mean, it's a different dynamic, right? You don't have elective offices. You don't have elective boards that you can go to. You have a corporation. There's a corporate relationship. And so we do need to, I think, acquire a deeper sense of empowerment as parents and as members of communities. We all pay taxes, right? We all pay taxes, and they go to fund our public education system. We should, like envision ourselves as people that are just, as a result of the structure, entitled to a voice, right? But those are the kinds of sensibilities that still have to be cultivated for communities that have been marginal and disempowered for just so very long. I don't know if I answered the question, but
I think so. Yeah. A follow-up to the discussion about the Ethnic Studies program here in Austin ISD. There's a question about how have you been able to sustain this program for the future?
That's a very good question. Yeah, thank you for asking that. So what really helps is that we are working with Title I schools. That means low-income schools, right? As schools get gentrified, they can lose that status, by the way. And it makes it difficult to get Title I monies or Title III, right? And so Title I is for low-income schools, and that's what pays for the teachers. It pays for, the bus trips, the field trips, the curriculum, I mean, not so much the curriculum development itself, but it covers a lot of the convenings and what we do internally to to expand what we do. We also volunteer. This is mostly a volunteer initiative. It covers the costs of 2 coordinators, and we're so grateful for the partnership. Again, we're just so grateful to Dr. David Kaufman, who really has been our champion before the board. But there's others, and we're just feel so grateful. But there's federal dollars, and those are our taxes too, right? And so it's not like we're getting some kind of bounty here, but rather, we're getting something as a result, finally, as communities that we should have gotten all along, right? We should have gotten all this all along. It shouldn't be just, like just an add-on, but as everyone is saying, just what school is, right? And I do want to underscore the importance of bilingual education. I mean, we should be speaking multiple languages. When you go to Europe, I mean, everybody's speaking all of these different languages, and that's normal, right? Well, in this country, we totally police language, and people don't support that, and that's also one of those dispositions that just does not square with the complex global transborder hemispheric diverse reality that we actually have to prepare the next generation for. It's not just a nice thing for us, it's a nice thing for everyone to be able to command sort of diverse competencies, linguistic, social, cultural. And you're not born with that. You have to be exposed to that and taught that by good teachers like Andrew.
Absolutely. I think that you're right. We live in such a different world than when the education system was created, and it has not changed and shifted to meet the needs and to break away from those phobic and oppressive ways. And so thank you for, pushing forward, and all of the volunteers and folks who do the work to maintain such an interesting and helpful program. We have a couple questions in the Q&A box, and I'm going to kind of combine because they kind of hit on similar topics. So we have discussed a lot of that the population at Travis High School especially, but in Austin, is more Latinx, more Hispanic. And so there's some folks in the crowd who do have a similar population, and they have found trouble getting their Black students to feel comfortable on campus because of things that may have happened, racial incidents on campus, or folks just looking to include the African American or Black studies voice in ethnic studies. Or how would you say that we could make sure these less represented groups are empowered and feel represented, or how are they represented in the coursework?
Andrew, I can talk. You talk.
Sure. So I would say that first of all, in my mind, like as an ethnic studies teacher, formerly, there are like three pillars to the program. One of them that Dr. Valenzuela had mentioned earlier was multicultural education, right? Like including in your classroom a diversity of experiences that are not only the ones reflective of the ones that your students are going through, but also include people that are outside of your school community. But the second one is that it should be culturally responsive. It should also respond particularly to the environment that you're in. And so ethnic studies should not look the same at every school. And if I were at a school like Travis, that, for example, had a significant population of Latinx identifying kids, like 85%, but also the 10% of African-American students. And so it was essential for me to include elements of the course that spoke to both of those experiences, because while there are commonalities, they are both distinct. The other thing that I want to say is that ethnic studies is an interdisciplinary class, and so it's not just history and literature. It's also social emotional learning. That was a significant part of the class, was engaging in what are restorative justice circles, right? Like restorative practice circles on a routine basis in the class, and just letting students know that this was not like your typical history, English, whatever class that you've been through. And so I think if there's been incidents of harm on your campus between populations of students, between groups, I would start with normalizing engaging in social emotional learning in your classroom, and then addressing those through that platform.
I would just add, I think you're wonderful, Andrew, and I think you have a real mastery, a real sense of how to make sure that everyone feels included. But I would say advocate for African American studies. Okay, I mean, we need African American studies. We need African American studies teachers. We need Native American studies. We need Asian American studies, right? And just because you teach, one of those areas doesn't mean you can teach the other. I mean, it just doesn't. I mean, in a lifetime, or if you just really dedicate yourself, most certainly, and of course, we're lifelong learners, and it's also important within the Latino. The experience to recognize indigeneity. We're also African and indigenous. I mean, we have those histories, right? We're biracial, right? We have more than, or multiracial sometimes, in our sense of selves, or we're Afro-Latino. One thing that I've noticed with the Black Lives Matter movement is a resurgence in interest in all of this that we're talking about, in curriculum, in identity, and I see a real voice within the Latino community coming out that is powerful, and it is the it's the African identity, and I think that these identities need to flourish, right? Because it's painful for them to have to choose between either being, African American or Latino. I mean, that's putting, young people through very different kinds of choices. So we have to name the problem, right? The problem that we're abiding by these kind of narrow visions sometimes of identity, and we need to just, blow it up, open it up, and you do that by doing what you're doing, Andrew, by converting your classroom into this space where people can express their truth, right? And they can say who they are, and it has to happen in ways big and small.
Absolutely. I think y'all are both just hit the nail on the head. It's powerful for sure. We have just 2 minutes left, and I'm going to ask a question that's not the most voted one, so I apologize for those of you who asked some questions on there that we're not going to get to, but this one I feel like we can answer maybe in a couple minutes and follow up with a good discussion. And so the question is, how do people learn about this kind of education when we as adults have been schooled in the colonization? So as adults, how can we, you know, do ethnic studies without having the course? And, you know, how can we do those things? So I don't know who would want to answer that, but how can we get access? What resources do you have for us?
I talk a lot, so I'm.
Andrew looks like, I don't know.
That's hard, man, because it's like, it's almost, I feel like it was just by, well, okay, okay, here's what it is. It's like critical self-reflection. That's where I would start, because it's not, I wanted to say at first that it was like my experiences as, you know, who I am, the things that my family has gone through that brought me to an understanding of how to best implement ethnic studies. And so that's kind of the best advice. It's like, okay, yeah, this is what I'm thinking about. My freshman year at UT, I took a course with Dr. Valenzuela's husband, Dr. Emilio Zamora, and it was Texas history. And our culminating project was for us to do an interview with our like oldest surviving relative, and to record it and to analyze it according to all these themes. And so I truly, like Aldo was saying, I didn't have a sense of who I was or what was important to me until I had engaged in that project that Dr. Zamora had put in front of us, right? And then it was through that I just felt like I kind of transformed. I saw so many different valuable things in myself. And then lo and behold, I come out of UT, and one of the first things that my principal, Ty Davidson, asked me, who's now one of the associate superintendents in the ISD, he was like, I got this new course. Would you like to teach it? And then boom, Dr. Valenzuela. And so it kind of just like the stars aligned for me. But when I think about where it started, it was engaging in a process of critical self-reflection. And it's important for white educators to do that too, that it doesn't have to just be teachers of color necessarily that teach ethnic studies. It can be white teachers too, but they have to be willing to engage in that process. One of the things that Aldo and Marian didn't bring up, but that was true, is that constantly when we were talking about these topics in class, I framed them within the history of my own family, and to model that type of engagement with your own identity and with your history and your place in the country that you want students to do. So that's, yeah, I don't know if I answered that, but that's what I'm thinking right now.
I mean, I think you did. I think that in some ways that's what we're kind of trying to do in this webinar series of like, especially as we move forward, you'll see, like, take a look at your own, do some self-work, do some self-reflection, some self-care, and do the work to find yourself, find the roles that you can play in all of this. And I think that that's the best answer, Andrew, that it takes each person doing the work, which feels tedious, but that's the only way we're going to make any change ever, is if each person does that work. So thank you for that really thoughtful answer. We have hit our time. We are so grateful for all of you who have joined us today to watch and participate. I want to plug next week's webinar. It's next Wednesday at 5 p.m. and we are going to talk about the state of education today. We will have the executive director of NEA, the dean of the College of Education at UT, as well as a reporter from Chalk Beat. And it'll be moderated by Dr. Leonard Moore from the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement at UT. So it'll be a very rich conversation that will balance perfectly with what was spoken about here, and tie together so well. And then we'll move into a lot of action oriented in our following webinars. So if you have not signed up for all of our Zooms or for the Canvas course, you are welcome to do so. You will get a link in your email tomorrow. If you register through Zoom, Mallory threw a link in there for all of the articles and docs, resources that were either mentioned or will be added, about some of the research behind ethnic studies after the fact. So we appreciate you being here today. And I want to say the biggest thank you to our panelists. Dr. Valenzuela, your knowledge and energy is just infectious, and we're so glad that you were here with us. Mr. Gonzalez, you are an all-star teacher, and I can see why you won Teacher of the Year on your Canvas last year. That is fantastic. And Aldo and Marian, you are inspiring, and we are grateful that you took an hour and a half to spend with us to enlighten us. We are very proud of what you do and so glad to have had you here tonight, and can't wait to see what you do with your futures, because you have bright futures ahead. So thank you all again, and we will see you on the other side. Bye,
Thank you
everybody.
so much. Thank you very much.